Hey guys, tonight we're heading to the heart of the Aztec Empire, but instead of grand pyramids or fierce warriors, we're stepping into the very soil where their everyday lives flourished, into their gardens. You're surrounded by green, maybe even a little bit of the earthy scent of damp soil as you walk along the edge of the milpas, those sacred crop fields that supported an entire civilization. Now, don't get too comfortable, because farming in ancient Mesoamerica wasn't a leisurely affair. Between the rituals, the labour, and the fine-tuned agricultural methods, the Aztecs had quite the system to grow their food. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Oh, and feel free to drop your location and the local time. You know, just to imagine you're sitting under the stars in Tenochtitlan at dusk. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The Aztecs weren't just gardeners, they were master cultivators. The entire system of their agriculture was based on an intricate understanding of nature and a deep respect for the land. It wasn't just about growing food, it was about harmony with the earth, and nowhere was this more evident than in their gardens. Corn, or maize, was the heart of their agricultural practice, woven into the very fabric of their daily life. The gods gave it to them, and they reciprocated by offering it back in worship. Picture yourself there, the sun just beginning to set, the air cooling with the evening breeze as you step onto the shores of Lake Texcoco. Stretching out before you is the magnificent city of Tenochtitlan, but it's not the towering pyramids that draw your attention right now. It's the lush green terraces of the chinampas, the floating gardens created by the Aztecs to grow corn, beans, squash, and a myriad of other crops. It's not just farming, it's an act of engineering genius. In a city built on water, these chinampas were a testament to the Aztecs' ability to adapt, transform their environment, and make the most of what they had. You might wonder how they pulled this off. Well, it's all about the environment, a delicate balance between water and soil which the Aztecs mastered with their floating gardens. These chinampas were like islands, small rectangular plots created by staking out sections of the shallow lake, weaving together reeds, mud, and vegetation, then allowing the water to keep the soil fertile. Imagine the lake's surface being dotted with these lush, green patches, their edges framed by the reflective water as the city's vibrant life unfolded around them. Every inch of this space was cultivated to perfection, transforming what would seem like an inhospitable wetland into a bountiful farming paradise. Historians still argue whether the chinampas were truly the most efficient form of farming in the ancient world. But one thing is certain, they fed an empire. And not just any empire. The Aztecs were expert planners, and they knew that nothing could thrive without the right balance. From the start, they made the very soil their ally. Imagine the excitement you'd feel as an Aztec farmer, knowing that you are tending to the heart of society itself, corn. You walk through rows of lush green plants, each stalk standing tall under the warm sun, leaves rustling in the breeze. The importance of this crop can't be overstated. Corn was life. It wasn't just food, it was sacred, woven into the very fabric of Aztec society. The Aztecs didn't just grow corn to survive. They grew it to honour their gods and sustain their people. And yet, this sacred crop was a symbol of unity, its cultivation bringing together communities, families, and even entire city-states. Corn was central to Aztec life in so many ways. It was the cornerstone of their diet, appearing in nearly every meal. Whether it was in the form of tortillas, tamales, or atole, a comforting corn-based drink, corn was the base of nearly everything the Aztecs consumed. But beyond nutrition, corn played a crucial role in religion and mythology. For the Aztecs, corn was a gift from the gods, a divine offering they treated with the utmost reverence. In fact, one of the most powerful gods in Aztec religion was Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, who, according to myth, taught the Aztecs how to grow corn. Quetzalcoatl's gift wasn't just practical, it was a sign of divine favour. Historians still debate whether Quetzalcoatl was an entirely symbolic figure, or if he was based on a historical ruler, but either way, his association with corn made this crop even more significant. Walking through a milpa, you would see the diverse crops growing in harmony with one another, corn, beans and squash, a triad known as the Three Sisters. This trio of crops formed the foundation of Aztec farming. Corn provided a tall, sturdy stalk for the beans to climb, Beans enriched the soil with nitrogen, and squash spread out on the ground, acting as a natural mulch to keep moisture in. The Aztecs didn't rely on modern fertilizers or pesticides. Instead, they understood how nature worked together in a balanced ecosystem. It wasn't just about maximizing food production, it was about creating a sustainable, symbiotic relationship between plants, soil, and water. Historians still debate whether the Three Sisters system was a purely Aztec creation, or if it was passed down from earlier Mesoamerican cultures. But one thing is clear: the Aztecs' mastery of crop diversity was essential to their agricultural success. These milpas weren't just about feeding the population, they were carefully designed, functioning like miniature ecosystems, ensuring that the land stayed fertile for generations to come. It's this understanding of balance, of working with nature rather than against it, that made their farming so effective and their civilization so resilient. And as you continue walking, you can't help but notice how the Aztecs' relationship with their crops was spiritual as much as it was practical. Corn wasn't just a crop to them, it was a reflection of the very cycle of life. To grow it was to honor the gods. To harvest it was to celebrate the bounty of the earth. Each ear of corn was a symbol of the cosmos, a reminder that life, like the crop, is always in a state of growth, change, and renewal. As you stand there in the milpas, the air thick with the scent of earth and growing plants, you begin to realize that these gardens were more than just places to grow food. They were sacred grounds, carefully tended not just for practical purposes, but as part of the very spiritual fabric of the Aztec world. The Aztecs viewed agriculture as a divine act. Each step in planting, caring for, and harvesting their crops was an offering to the gods. The milpas, these expansive crop fields, were as much a part of their worship as the grand temples and ceremonial sacrifices that punctuated their religious calendar. But these gardens weren't just revered because of their spiritual importance. They were also sophisticated, well-planned spaces that demonstrated an advanced understanding of agricultural science. The Aztecs employed a farming method that made use of every square inch of available land. They transformed their environment in ways that seemed almost magical, turning swampy lake beds and rocky hillsides into productive, lush gardens. They didn't just plant corn, they crafted entire landscapes that were integrated with their religious beliefs, allowing them to sustain their people while honouring the gods who gifted them this life-giving crop. The concept of the sacred milpa was intertwined with the Aztec creation myth. The Aztecs believed that the world was created through the sacrifice of gods, and the milpas were seen as an ongoing act of creation. When the first gods gave their blood to create humanity, the Aztecs in turn offered their own sacrifices. Corn was the most important offering. The milpas represented both a physical and spiritual connection to the earth, a reminder that agriculture was not simply about cultivating food, but about participating in the cosmic order. One of the most fascinating aspects of this sacred relationship was how the Aztecs aligned their agricultural practices with their calendar. The Aztec calendar, based on both solar and lunar cycles, determined not just religious festivals, but also the planting and harvesting seasons. They knew the precise days to plant corn, knowing that the position of the stars and the timing of the rains would influence the success of their crops. It's almost as though the Aztecs were following a divine timetable that dictated the perfect moments to work with the earth. Historians still argue about the level of influence the calendar had on daily life, but it's clear that the Aztecs were deeply connected to these celestial cycles, using them as guides for every aspect of their lives, agriculture included. As you walk deeper into the milpa, you start to get a sense of the meticulousness that governed every aspect of Aztec farming. It wasn't just about putting seeds into the ground. It was about ensuring the crops thrived in perfect harmony with the land, the heavens, and the gods. And in these sacred spaces, the Aztecs felt not only a profound responsibility to care for their crops, but a deep sense of reverence, aware that their very survival was linked to the cycles of nature and the favour of the divine. Historians still debate the precise methods the Aztecs used to ensure such sustainable crop growth, with some suggesting their intricate irrigation and drainage systems were just as important as the crops themselves. Yet one thing is certain: the Aztecs mastered a farming system that allowed them to feed an empire of hundreds of thousands, all while honouring the earth and the gods. Their gardens were not just fields, they were living testaments to the union of nature, science, and spirituality. Now that you've seen the sacred nature of the Aztec milpas, let's shift gears and dive into the most innovative aspect of Aztec agriculture, the chinampa system. Picture this. You're standing at the edge of a shimmering lake, and before you, stretching across the water, are lush, vibrant gardens floating as if by magic. These are the chinampas, an extraordinary form of farming that revolutionized how the Aztecs fed their people. As you stand there, the soft ripple of the water is soothing, almost hypnotic, and you can see the floating beds of crops bobbing gently with the current. The chinampa system is one of the most impressive feats of Aztec engineering. Rather than working with the dry land like most ancient civilizations, the Aztecs turned water into their ally. They created small rectangular islands by weaving together reeds and branches to form a foundation. On top of this base, they laid rich, fertile mud dredged from the lake bed, and over time, the chinampas became remarkably productive gardens. It's like building a floating patch of paradise right on the water. Imagine walking out to one of these chinampas, surrounded by corn, beans, squash and vibrant flowers, all growing on land that is, in a way, alive and constantly renewed by the water. But it wasn't just the floating nature of the chinampas that made them so effective. It was the genius behind the system. The Aztecs understood that the lake provided more than just water. It also offered a constant source of nutrients. The chinampas were not just patches of earth. They were dynamic, living systems where the soil was constantly replenished by the water below. As water flowed through the canals surrounding the chinampas, it carried organic material from the lake that enriched the soil, making it incredibly fertile. This allowed the Aztecs to grow multiple crops per year, ensuring that they had a steady supply of food even in a city as densely populated as Tenochtitlan. Historians still debate just how much the chinampas contributed to the Aztec economy, compared to other forms of farming, but there's no denying that the system was highly efficient. The land was intensely cultivated, and the farmers used every inch to its fullest potential. The water around the chinampas was also used for transport, with boats navigating the canals to bring fresh produce into the city. It's almost as if the chinampas were a self-sustaining ecosystem, providing food, transportation, and even waste disposal in one harmonious system. The real beauty of this system, though, was that it was perfectly suited to the geography of Tenochtitlan. Located on an island in the middle of Lake Texcoco, the Aztec capital could have easily been hemmed in by its surrounding waters, but the chinampas transformed the lake into an agricultural boon. The city thrived on the floating gardens, and with them, the Aztecs were able to sustain a population of over 200,000 people at their height. To put that in perspective, it's like having a sustainable garden city built on water, a feat that modern cities could only dream of. Of course, the chinampas weren't without their challenges. They required constant upkeep, and the delicate balance of water, soil and plant life had to be carefully maintained. But the Aztecs' deep knowledge of their environment meant that they were masters of this floating world. They had perfected the art of balancing the needs of the crops with the natural rhythms of the lake, creating an agricultural paradise that could support a thriving empire. As you stand there, watching the waves gently rock the chinampas, it's clear that these floating gardens were more than just a farming technique. They were a testament to the Aztecs' ingenuity and their reverence for the land and water that nourished them. Now that you're mesmerized by the floating beauty of the chinampas, let's step into a different rhythm of Aztec farming, the cycle of crop rotation. As you stand in the milpas, feeling the soft earth underfoot, it becomes clear that Aztec agriculture wasn't just about planting and harvesting. It was about understanding the deeper cycles of nature. The Aztecs knew that to keep the soil fertile, they had to work with the land, not just on it. They didn't rely on modern fertilizers or artificial methods. Instead, they practiced a sophisticated system of crop rotation that ensured their fields would remain productive for generations. Imagine this. You're standing in the middle of a field, watching a group of farmers move about, their hands deftly turning the soil. There's an underlying rhythm to their movements, as if they're working in tune with the very heartbeat of the earth. The Aztecs would alternate crops in their milpas to prevent soil depletion. This was especially important for corn, which, as a heavy feeder, could quickly exhaust the soil if planted repeatedly in the same spot. After a harvest of corn, the farmers would allow the land to rest, planting beans or squash in its place. Beans, you see, were nitrogen fixers, legumes that added vital nutrients back into the soil, enriching it for future crops. It's not hard to imagine the sense of relief the land must have felt when it was given time to breathe, to recover. The Aztecs had a deep understanding of how to replenish the soil's health, giving each crop its turn to restore balance. They rotated crops not just to ensure a constant food supply, but to honour the Earth's natural cycles. To them, the land wasn't a resource to be exploited, it was a partner to be respected. Historians still argue about the full extent to which crop rotation influenced Aztec farming methods. Some suggest that it was a common practice across Mesoamerica, while others believe the Aztecs refined it into an art form. Regardless, it's clear that the practice of rotating crops was critical to their success. The milpas were more than just a collection of plants. They were part of an ongoing living system that helped sustain the community in a sustainable way. The Aztecs were masters of this symbiotic relationship, creating a balance between crop growth, soil health, and the rhythms of nature. As you wander through these fields, you might also notice something that seems a bit odd. The timing. The Aztecs didn't just plant based on the seasons. They planted based on the lunar and solar cycles, consulting the calendar to determine the best days for planting and harvesting. It's almost as if the Aztecs had an internal clock that synchronized perfectly with the natural world, ensuring their crops were planted at precisely the right moments. Historians still debate the role the Aztec calendar played in everyday life, but one thing is certain: it was deeply tied to agriculture. It's fascinating to think about how the cycles of the moon and the sun dictated the Aztecs' farming practices. They understood that everything in nature was interconnected, and that to thrive, they had to honour the land, the seasons, and the gods who watched over them. Standing here in the milpas, you can feel the slow rhythm of life around you, a balance of nature that the Aztecs worked to maintain with every seed they planted, every crop they harvested, and every ritual they performed. The land, after all, was as much a part of their spiritual life as it was of their daily survival. As you stroll through the milpas, the gentle rustling of the leaves and the distant sounds of birds seem to lull you into a peaceful rhythm. But beyond this tranquility, there's something crucial going on under the surface: water. The Aztecs understood that no crop could thrive without a steady, reliable water source, and that's where their sophisticated irrigation systems came in. Walking along the edge of the fields, you noticed the delicate canals winding their way through the landscape, an intricate web of channels designed to keep the soil moist and the crops hydrated. These irrigation systems were nothing short of engineering marvels. The Aztecs harnessed the natural geography of Lake Texcoco to create a network of canals that fed their fields, ensuring that water could reach every inch of their carefully cultivated lands. Imagine the scene: workers standing knee-deep in water, adjusting the flow in the canals, making sure that each chinampa, each plot of corn received the right amount of moisture. It was a constant balancing act, and the Aztecs were masters of it. They didn't just rely on rainwater, but on a vast network of artificial canals and dams that helped distribute water across their fields year-round. The Aztecs didn't have modern pumps or sophisticated technology, but they had something far more effective: their intimate understanding of water's role in agriculture. They knew that water was life, and they built their entire agricultural infrastructure around it. They used canals to direct water from the lake into the fields, ensuring that the crops were watered evenly and consistently. And where there were areas that were too dry, they created sophisticated water diversion systems that channeled water from the lake's edge right into the fields. Historians still argue whether the Aztec irrigation systems were the most advanced of their time, with some suggesting that the Egyptians or the Sumerians had equally impressive methods. However, one thing is clear: the Aztecs' ability to manipulate water was key to their agricultural success. Their irrigation systems didn't just support the chinampas, they supported the entire city of Tenochtitlan, which was an island on the lake. The canals didn't just supply water for farming, they were also used for transportation, connecting different parts of the city and allowing the exchange of goods and people. Walking along one of these canals, you can't help but marvel at the ingenuity behind it all. The Aztecs didn't just take what nature gave them, they transformed it, bending it to their will. Water wasn't just a resource, it was an essential part of their daily life and their survival, and every time they turned a valve or adjusted a canal, they were demonstrating their deep connection to the land and the elements. Of course, maintaining this delicate system required constant care and attention. Farmers would regularly check the canals, ensuring that they were free of debris and that the flow was steady. They had to be attuned to the smallest changes in the environment, knowing that even a small shift in water levels could affect the success of the crops. It was a job that required patience, knowledge, and a deep respect for the natural world. Historians still debate the extent to which the Aztecs relied on these irrigation systems for their success. But one thing is certain: Water was at the heart of everything they did. From the canals that nourished their crops to the floating chinampas that allowed them to cultivate in the middle of a lake, the Aztecs were able to make the most of the environment around them. And as you stand there, listening to the soft ripple of the water and the distant sounds of the city, you can almost feel the pulse of this ancient civilization, thriving, living, and working in perfect harmony with the land and the water that sustained them. As the soft sounds of the water and the rustling of leaves fade into the background, you begin to realize just how important the varieties of corn were to the Aztecs. Walking through the milpas, you see rows upon rows of corn, each plant slightly different from the other. The Aztecs didn't just grow one type of corn, they grew many, each with its own unique role in society. The corn wasn't just food, it was a living symbol of abundance, diversity, and connection to the gods. Every variety had a purpose, whether for rituals, festivals, or everyday sustenance. The most common variety was the maize that fed the masses, but the Aztecs also grew a range of specialized types. There were red, blue, yellow, and white corns, each believed to carry its own power. Blue corn, for example, was often associated with the gods of the rain, and was considered particularly sacred. It wasn't just about food, the types of corn grown could signify wealth, status, or even the relationship a family or community had with the divine. As you walk through the rows, you can imagine the farmers carefully selecting which types of corn to plant based on their specific needs. Some corn was grown for daily consumption, while others were reserved for ceremonial use. The intricacy of this selection process wasn't just practical, it was deeply symbolic. The very act of choosing which seeds to plant was an offering to the gods, a way to ensure that the harvest would be bountiful and the community would thrive. Historians still argue about how much variety there truly was in Aztec corn. Some believe there were dozens of distinct types, each with its own specific purpose. Others suggest that while the Aztecs had many varieties, their classification was more symbolic than scientific. Regardless of the specifics, the fact remains that corn was central to the Aztec way of life, both in practical and spiritual terms. Corn wasn't just a staple of their diet, it was woven into their mythology. In Aztec creation myths, corn was often seen as the source of life itself. The gods who created humanity were said to have done so using corn, which was considered sacred. This belief made corn not just an agricultural product, but a gift from the gods, one that deserved careful attention, respect, and reverence. The sacredness of corn also meant that certain rituals were performed to ensure its successful growth. These rituals were often elaborate, involving the participation of entire communities. Corn was offered back to the gods in ceremonies meant to invoke blessings and ensure a good harvest. These ceremonies were deeply spiritual, blending the practical with the divine. Farmers, priests, and rulers would come together, offering prayers, sacrifices, and food to the gods, in hopes of securing a bountiful harvest for the coming year. Imagine the scene. It's the height of the harvest season, and the entire community is gathered at the edge of the milpas. The air is thick with the scent of fresh corn, the sound of chanting and prayer fills the air, and the sacred fire burns brightly as offerings are made to the gods. The harvest is not just a time of labour, it is a time of celebration, a time to honour the earth and the divine forces that sustained life. Historians still debate the extent to which these religious rituals influenced the timing and methods of agricultural practices. Some suggest that the ceremonies were integral to the success of the crops, while others believe that the rituals were more about reinforcing societal unity and reverence for the gods. Regardless, it's clear that for the Aztecs, growing corn was as much about spiritual connection as it was about feeding the population. As you continue through the milpas, the sun now hanging low in the sky, you begin to appreciate the precision of the Aztec farmers' tools. It's hard to imagine how such a sophisticated system of agriculture was maintained without the modern tools we take for granted. But the Aztecs had a deep knowledge of their environment and the tools they needed to work it. Instead of ploughs or mechanical harvesters, they used simple but highly effective implements made from bone, wood, and obsidian. Each tool was designed to serve a specific function, ensuring that the entire process, from planting to harvesting, was as efficient as possible. Walking closer to the field, you can see the farmers at work, their hands steady as they use a koe, a large flat pointed tool used for digging and planting. The koe was made from a wooden handle with a sharp obsidian tip, effective for breaking through the hard, compacted earth of the milpas. Imagine the sound of the sharp edge cutting into the soil, the rhythmic motion as the farmers worked in unison, preparing the land for the next round of planting. The use of obsidian, a volcanic glass, was another key element in Aztec farming. Obsidian was not just for making weapons. Its sharpness made it ideal for crafting tools. The Aztecs were skilled in using this material for everything from knives to agricultural implements. These tools were not just functional, they were a testament to the ingenuity of the Aztecs, who made the most of what they had, crafting tools that allowed them to work in harmony with the land. Historians still debate whether these tools were the most efficient for the tasks at hand. Some argue that the use of obsidian gave the Aztecs an edge over other ancient civilizations in terms of precision and durability. Others suggest that while their tools were effective, the lack of metal implements may have limited their overall agricultural output. However, one thing is certain. The Aztecs were masters of resourcefulness, using the materials around them to create tools that were perfectly suited to their needs. As you watch the farmers work, it's hard not to marvel at the connection they had with their tools and the land. These weren't just instruments of labour, they were extensions of the farmers themselves, crafted with care and used with great skill. The farmers didn't just work the land, they were in tune with it, using their tools to mould the earth and coax it into providing for them. The tools were part of the same ecosystem they nurtured, simple yet deeply effective and imbued with the spirit of the Aztec relationship with nature. Walking further through the field, you notice the careful attention to detail in everything the farmers do. From planting the corn seeds to tending to the crops, everything is done with an awareness of the land's needs. The farmers don't rush. There's a rhythm to their work, a deep understanding of when to plant, when to water, and when to let the soil rest. Their tools might be simple, but their knowledge is vast. The labour is hard, but it is also meditative, a quiet act of creation that allows the Aztecs to live in harmony with the world around them. Historians still argue whether the Aztecs' reliance on hand tools limited the size of their farms, or whether it was more about precision and care in cultivating the land. Regardless of these debates, it's clear that the Aztecs' understanding of tools and their connection to the land was a central part of their success. These tools were not just instruments, they were part of a much larger system, one that combined labour, knowledge and spirituality into a seamless process of cultivation. As the sun sinks lower, casting long shadows across the milpas, you start to sense that there's more at play than just crops and tools. The Aztecs saw their relationship with the earth and their crops as something deeply spiritual. It wasn't just about planting and harvesting, it was about honouring the gods. Corn in particular was sacred, woven into the very fabric of Aztec religion. And as you walk deeper into the milpas, it becomes clear just how much of the Aztec farming practices were tied to their beliefs about the divine. Corn wasn't just a crop, it was the embodiment of life itself. In Aztec mythology, the gods had created humans from corn, and in return, the Aztecs believed it was their duty to give back to the gods by offering them the very thing that gave them life. Corn was seen as both a gift and a responsibility. The rituals surrounding its cultivation and harvest were intricate and deeply significant. As you watch the farmers tend to their crops, you can't help but feel the reverence they hold for the earth beneath their feet, as if every plant they care for is part of a divine cycle. The most important god in the Aztec corn mythology was Sentiotl, the god of maize. Sentiotl was considered the deity responsible for the growth of corn and was revered as a giver of life. Offerings of corn, particularly in the form of freshly harvested ears, were made during religious ceremonies, thanking the gods for the bounty of the land. The connection between corn and the divine was so deep that entire festivals were dedicated to Sentiotl. The harvest festival in particular was a time of great celebration, full of music, dance and prayers, celebrating the life-giving power of corn. Historians still argue about the specifics of Aztec religious practices surrounding corn. Some suggest that corn was considered so sacred that only priests or elite individuals could offer it to the gods, while others believe it was a more communal practice. Regardless of the details, it's clear that the Aztecs viewed their agricultural work as part of a sacred duty. For them, farming wasn't just about survival. It was about ensuring the favour of the gods and maintaining balance in the world. The ceremonial importance of corn also meant that the Aztecs took great care to ensure its proper cultivation. Each step of the farming process, planting, tending, harvesting, was done with reverence, and it was believed that if the rituals were not followed properly, the crops would fail. The farmers worked in harmony with the cycles of the earth, planting at the right times, offering prayers, and making sacrifices to ensure a bountiful harvest. Imagine the scene. It's early morning, and a group of farmers gathers at the edge of the milpas. The sky is still dark and the air is cool as they begin their work. Before they start planting, they pause for a moment of prayer, offering thanks to Tentiotl and the other gods of the harvest. They speak words of gratitude, asking for the crops to grow strong and plentiful. It's a simple moment, but one that carries the weight of generations of tradition and belief. Historians still debate whether these agricultural rituals were a central part of everyday farming, or more reserved for special occasions. Some believe that the rituals were woven into the fabric of daily life, while others suggest that they were reserved for key moments in the farming calendar, such as planting and harvest time. However, what's clear is that the connection between the Aztecs and their crops was deeply spiritual, and their farming practices were inseparable from their beliefs. As you stand in the middle of the milpas, the sun now setting and the first stars beginning to twinkle overhead, you realize that for the Aztecs, farming wasn't just a job, it was a way of life. A way of life intertwined with their spirituality, their culture, and their understanding of the natural world. Every ear of corn, every crop that grew, was a gift from the gods, and in turn, every harvest was an offering back to the divine. As you pause amidst the rows of corn, the sky above now dotted with stars, you start to feel the weight of the Aztecs' deep connection to their farming practices. Their reverence for the gods and the land wasn't just about ceremonies, it was embedded in every part of their lives, including their daily labour. And no part of this was more visible than in the fertility rituals they performed to ensure the success of their crops. These rituals, often elaborate and filled with symbolism, were an essential part of the agricultural cycle. For the Aztecs, the act of planting and harvesting was a sacred endeavour, one that required not just physical labour, but also spiritual dedication. The fertility rituals were intricately tied to the cycles of the earth and the agricultural seasons. You can almost feel the anticipation in the air as the Aztec farmers prepare to begin their work. Before planting, they would make offerings to the gods of fertility, gifts of flowers, incense, and, of course, corn. These offerings were meant to ensure the soil would be fertile and the crops would grow strong. In fact, the very soil they worked with was considered sacred. The Aztecs believed that the earth itself was alive, and that it had a soul, one that needed to be treated with respect and care. The most important ritual for the fertility of corn was the planting ceremony. As you watch the farmers begin their day's work, you can almost see them moving with purpose, their actions a silent prayer to the gods. Before they even touched the soil, they would offer prayers, asking for divine favour. There was no hasty planting here. Everything was done with intention, each seed planted with reverence, each motion a reminder of the sacred nature of their work. The Aztecs understood that their survival depended on their relationship with the earth and the gods, and they were willing to perform whatever rituals were necessary to ensure a good harvest. Historians still argue about the specific details of these fertility rituals, particularly the role of human sacrifice in agricultural practices. While some scholars suggest that sacrifices were offered to the gods to ensure crop fertility, others believe that the offerings were more symbolic, designed to maintain harmony between humans and the divine. Regardless of the specifics, what's clear is that the Aztecs didn't take their agricultural duties lightly. They understood that their work wasn't just about physical labour, it was about maintaining balance in the world. The fertility rituals weren't just limited to the act of planting. At harvest time, when the crops were ripe, the Aztecs performed another round of rituals to thank the gods for the bounty they had received. This wasn't just a simple prayer of gratitude, it was a grand celebration, complete with feasts, music, and dancing. The harvest was a time of great joy, a time to celebrate the successful crops and the community that had worked together to bring them to life. Imagine the scene. The sun is setting, and the farmers gather together in the centre of the milpas, their arms raised to the heavens in thanks. The air is thick with the scent of freshly harvested corn, and the rhythmic beat of drums fills the air as the community comes together to celebrate the harvest. It's a time of joy and unity, a time when the connection between the people, the land, and the gods is most evident. Historians still debate whether the Aztecs truly believed that their rituals directly influenced the success of their crops. Some argue that the rituals were a form of cultural expression, a way of reinforcing societal norms and values. Others believe that the ceremonies played a more tangible role, directly contributing to the fertility of the land. Regardless of the perspective, it's clear that the fertility rituals were a fundamental part of Aztec farming, ensuring that the crops grew strong and the gods remained pleased. As the rhythm of the rituals fades into the background, you begin to realize that farming in Aztec society was a communal effort, deeply embedded in every aspect of their social structure. It wasn't just individual farmers working in isolation, it was a collective activity, one that involved everyone, from the labourers to the priests and even the nobility. The success of the crops, particularly corn, was not only the responsibility of the farmers themselves, but of the entire community. And at the heart of this communal effort were the tlacololeros, farmers who specialised in the hard labour of the fields, but particularly in the nighttime work, when the cooler temperatures made it easier to toil without the harsh sun overhead. Picture this. It's dusk, and the air has cooled just enough to make the work more bearable. You join a group of tlacololeros, working silently under the fading light. Their hands move deftly, planting, tending, or harvesting, depending on the season. The work is hard, but there's a rhythm to it, a calmness that settles over the group as the sky darkens and the stars emerge above. These farmers, often working by the light of torches or the moon, would continue their labour long into the night, ensuring that the fields were taken care of during the cooler hours of the day. It's a quiet, almost meditative time, filled with both a sense of community and a deep respect for the earth. While you watch the group, you realise that the work of the tlacololeros was physically demanding, yet there was something almost sacred in their nocturnal tasks. These farmers weren't just tending the crops, they were performing a vital service to the community. In Aztec society, the tlacololeros were considered essential, their labour ensuring the continued prosperity of the empire. They worked long hours, often under difficult conditions, but they were also regarded with respect, for their efforts were essential to the survival of their people. Historians still debate the role of these nighttime farmers. Some suggest that the use of cooler nighttime hours was a practical solution to the intense heat of the day, allowing the crops to be tended without causing damage from the harsh sunlight. Others believe that the work of the tlacololeros had a deeper spiritual significance. Their labour was often tied to the gods of agriculture, and some even suggest that their work in the dark of night symbolised a connection to the divine, perhaps as a way of ensuring that the gods worked in the shadows while the farmers toiled on earth. It's clear, however, that the work of the tlacololeros went beyond the physical labour of planting and harvesting. Their efforts were intertwined with the overall agricultural system, helping to ensure that the crops, particularly corn, thrived. And as you join them in their quiet labour, it's hard not to sense the deep respect they held for the land, the gods, and each other. Their work was a sacred duty, one that helped to keep the balance of life in the Aztec Empire intact. Historians still argue whether the labour of these farmers was regarded as a form of low-status work, or if it was elevated by its connection to the divine. Some suggest that while the tlacololeros were essential, they were not afforded the same social standing as priests or rulers. Others believe that their role was highly revered, given the significance of agriculture to Aztec society. Regardless of their status, the labour of the tlacololeros was vital to the success of Aztec farming, and it's through their hard work that the empire's food systems were sustained. As you stand there in the cooling evening air, working alongside the tlacololeros, you begin to understand that farming in the Aztec world was far more than a means of survival. It was a spiritual, communal, and deeply interconnected effort, one that required the participation of everyone in the society, from the humblest farmer to the highest priest. This shared responsibility ensured the survival of the people, and through their labour, the Aztecs created a thriving agricultural empire that would feed millions. As you continue your journey through the night, you start to sense that farming in the Aztec world wasn't just about growing food, it was also about the celebration of that food. The harvest wasn't a simple act of collecting what had been sown, it was an event. A grand festival full of rituals, music and dance would mark the occasion. The Aztecs knew how to throw a feast, and when it came to corn they pulled out all the stops. The harvest festivals were as much about honouring the gods as they were about sharing the fruits of the land with the community. It was a time of abundance, a time of unity, and a time to give thanks for the crops that sustained them. Picture this. The sun is setting, and you find yourself in the centre of a bustling Aztec marketplace. Everywhere you look, vendors are selling fresh produce, bright yellow corn, tomatoes, beans, and other fruits of the earth. The air is thick with the sound of drums and flutes, the rhythm of the music blending with the laughter and chatter of the crowd. This isn't just any market, it's a celebration. The harvest festival has begun. You can almost taste the excitement in the air as families and friends gather to celebrate the year's bounty. It's a vibrant, joyous occasion where food, music and spirituality come together. The harvest festivals were held at specific times of the year, based on the agricultural calendar. The Aztecs followed a complex system of cycles that determined the right time for planting and harvesting. The calendar was rooted in both the solar and lunar cycles, ensuring that the right crops were harvested at the right time. The harvest festival marked the end of one cycle and the beginning of the next, a time to honour the past and prepare for the future. Corn, as the cornerstone of Aztec agriculture, was always at the heart of these celebrations. During the festival, the Aztecs would offer sacrifices to the gods, thanking them for the corn that had been harvested. These offerings were often accompanied by elaborate ceremonies, where priests would make symbolic sacrifices, typically in the form of flowers, incense, and corn itself. The ritual wasn't about death or bloodshed. It was a way of giving back to the earth and the divine forces that sustained life. The sacred corn was offered back to the gods, ensuring that the cycles of nature would continue and that the land would remain fertile for the next planting season. Historians still debate the specifics of the Aztec harvest festivals, how elaborate they were, who participated, and what exactly was offered to the gods. Some argue that these festivals were primarily religious events, while others suggest they were also social gatherings, where people from all walks of life came together to celebrate the community's success. Whatever the case, it's clear that the harvest festival was more than just a time to collect crops. It was a time to come together, give thanks, and ensure the continuation of the agricultural cycle. Imagine the scene. The sun has now set, and the full moon casts a silvery glow over the gathering. The air is alive with the energy of the crowd as dancers perform in intricate ceremonial movements, their costumes bright and colourful. The rhythm of the drums beats through the earth, uniting everyone present in a shared celebration of life. It's a time of unity, a time when the community comes together to honour the gods, the land and the work of the farmers who made it all possible. The harvest is a reminder that the Aztec way of life was intricately connected to the earth, and every crop harvested was a gift, not just for sustenance, but for the continuation of life itself. Historians still debate how much these festivals were influenced by previous Mesoamerican cultures, but one thing is certain: the Aztecs made the harvest their own. They created a festival that was not just about food, but about spirituality, community, and the cyclical nature of life. The harvest was a celebration of abundance, and in every kernel of corn there was a reminder of the gods' gifts and the people's responsibility to honour them. As the sounds of the harvest festival begin to fade, you start to realise how deeply interconnected corn was to the entire Aztec economy. It wasn't just a food staple, it was a currency, a commodity, and a means of exchange. Corn wasn't just consumed at the table or offered to the gods, it was traded in the bustling Aztec marketplaces where it was a valuable form of wealth. Imagine yourself walking through one of Tenochtitlan's vibrant marketplaces, surrounded by the bustling crowd. The air is thick with the scent of roasting maize, freshly made tortillas, and exotic spices. Everywhere you look, you see traders haggling over corn, beans, and other goods. It's more than just a market, it's a living, breathing reflection of the empire's intricate social and economic systems. The marketplace was a place where the Aztecs came together to exchange goods, but corn was the most important commodity. Traders would bring their harvests to the market, exchanging corn for other goods like textiles, pottery, or obsidian tools. Corn was so integral to the Aztec economy that it became a form of currency, with certain amounts of corn being used to settle debts or pay for services. For the Aztecs, corn wasn't just food, it was a symbol of wealth and prosperity, a way to ensure that goods flowed freely throughout the empire. But the role of corn in the marketplace wasn't just about trade. It also reflected the Aztecs' deep understanding of supply and demand. They understood that to sustain such a large and growing empire, they needed to ensure a steady supply of food, and particularly corn. The success of the markets was tied directly to the harvests, and the wealth generated from trading corn enabled the Aztecs to support their complex social structures, from the nobility to the common labourers. The market was the heart of the economy, and corn was its lifeblood. Historians still debate the full extent to which corn influenced the Aztec economy. Some suggest that the rise of Tenochtitlan as a powerful trading hub was due to its control over corn production. while others believe that the Aztecs relied more on other goods like cacao or textiles for wealth. Regardless of the specifics, it's clear that corn was essential to the Aztec economy, and its presence in the marketplace was a visible sign of the empire's agricultural success. As you move through the market, you notice the vibrant colours of the corn displayed on the vendors' stalls, yellow, blue, red and white varieties, each symbolising different things in Aztec culture. You begin to realise that the variety of corn was just as significant in the marketplace as it was in the fields. Different types of corn would be sold for different purposes, some for food, others for religious ceremonies, and still others as gifts for the gods. Corn wasn't just a commodity. It was a reflection of the cultural and spiritual life of the Aztecs. Even in the marketplace, corn carried with it the weight of the divine, woven into the very fabric of society. Picture yourself bargaining for a bag of corn, the sound of the haggling echoing around you as vendors and customers exchange goods. It's clear that corn is more than just food. It's a commodity that sustains life and trade, connecting people across the empire in a vast network of exchange. As you make your way through the crowded market, you can almost feel the pulse of the empire, its heartbeat echoing in every transaction, every exchange of corn. Historians still debate whether the marketplaces were as vibrant and dynamic as the Aztecs believed. Some suggest that the markets were primarily symbolic of the empire's power, while others believe they were the true engine that drove the economy. Regardless of the specifics, one thing is certain. Corn played a central role in this intricate economic system, and its exchange in the markets ensured the prosperity of the empire. Now that you've walked through the bustling markets and felt the pulse of the Aztec economy, you start to realise that corn's importance wasn't just about feeding the people, it was also about maintaining the delicate balance of the empire. For the Aztecs, the stability of their agricultural system was an intricate web that kept their society functioning. But even the most well-oiled systems could face disruption, and when it came to crops, particularly corn, the threats of disease, pests, and the unpredictable forces of nature were constant concerns. These challenges were always looming, reminding the Aztecs that while they had mastered many aspects of agriculture, they were still vulnerable to forces outside their control. The relationship between abundance and scarcity was a fine one, and the consequences of failure in agriculture were high, often directly impacting the entire empire. Now imagine this. It's only a few weeks before the harvest, and suddenly a wave of pests swoops down upon the fields. The usual calm of the milpas is disrupted as farmers rush to assess the damage. The threat is serious. If left unchecked, these pests could destroy weeks of labour in a matter of days. You watch as the workers, who are already seasoned in the art of maintaining their fields, begin to implement the Aztec method of pest control. They don't have the modern pesticides that we're familiar with today, but their knowledge of nature and how to work with it is unparalleled. The Aztecs were experts in using organic solutions to fight off pests, employing techniques like planting certain herbs around the fields to repel insects, spreading ash and lime to disrupt the pests' activity, and even using natural predators to control harmful species. However, the risk was always there. Despite their ingenuity, crops could still be lost in a season, and the spectre of famine would always hang over the community during such times. Historians still debate the extent to which the Aztecs were able to keep pests in check. Some suggest that polyculture, the practice of growing multiple crops together, acted as a natural pest deterrent, as the diversity of plants confused or overwhelmed insects. Others believe that the use of organic treatments was a matter of trial and error, based on generations of passed-down wisdom. Whatever the specifics, it's clear that the Aztecs understood the precariousness of their farming system and took every measure they could to ensure its resilience. The work wasn't simply about maximizing productivity, it was about ensuring that their food system could withstand adversity, like pests, disease, and weather unpredictability. Equally pressing was the issue of weather. The Aztecs depended on seasonal rains to nourish their crops. They didn't have modern irrigation systems capable of storing vast amounts of water or distributing it precisely across a city. Their farming system was more directly reliant on the natural ebb and flow of rainfall. If the rains came too late, the crops would suffer from drought. Too much rain could flood the fields, washing away the soil, so the Aztecs had to be finely attuned to the weather, tracking both the solar and lunar cycles, as well as patterns of wind and rain. If the weather didn't cooperate, it could jeopardize the entire harvest. But the Aztecs didn't just sit back and hope for the best. They worked tirelessly to ensure that their system could accommodate the natural fluctuations of the climate. They constructed canals and levees to manage the flow of water, directing it to where it was most needed. This was where the beauty of the chinampas system came into play. The floating gardens, built on the shallow waters of Lake Texcoco, were not only a way to increase arable land, they also served as a means to manage the water that could flood their fields during heavy rains, directing the excess to where it was needed most, while preventing erosion. In times of drought or excess rain, the Aztecs would also turn to the gods. They believed that the gods had a direct influence over the weather, and part of their spiritual practices involved asking for favourable conditions. The gods were seen as powerful beings who could bless or curse the harvest depending on their moods. Corn, the most important crop, was directly linked to these gods, and the Aztecs made regular offerings to ensure that the gods would favour their crops. Historians still debate how central these religious practices were to agricultural success. Some believe that the rituals, while deeply meaningful, had little actual effect on the weather, while others argue that they were a reflection of the deeply embedded belief system that underpinned the entire agricultural operation. Either way, the Aztecs' relationship with the gods and their practices of spiritual offering were central to their sense of security. In times of crisis, turning to the gods was as much a practical response as it was a spiritual one. But even with all their knowledge of irrigation, pest control and divine intervention, the Aztecs were at the mercy of nature. Nature wasn't always kind, and the unpredictable forces of weather could wreak havoc on even the most carefully laid plans. In times when pests or drought threatened, the Aztecs had to take extreme measures. They would enact emergency food programs, redirect resources to provide for the most vulnerable communities, and rely on stored grains from previous harvests. But these measures were not always enough. Droughts or pest invasions could cripple the food supply for months, leading to widespread hunger and economic strain. You can imagine how heavy the burden of responsibility was on the shoulders of the farmers. They didn't just work the land for themselves, they worked it for the entire empire. Their labour sustained an entire civilization. As you stand in the middle of the field, feeling the rich earth underfoot, you realise that the land isn't just a place to grow crops, it's a fragile and sacred resource. The Aztecs knew this better than anyone. Every seed planted, every crop harvested, was a delicate transaction with the earth, one that required patience, knowledge, and respect. Historians continue to analyse how the Aztecs balanced their agricultural practices with their population growth. Some argue that the Aztecs' farming methods, particularly the chinampas, allowed them to support such a large urban population. Others suggest that the agrarian society was held together by constant vigilance, maintaining this delicate balance between nature and civilization. Whatever the case may be, the Aztecs' agricultural system was a remarkable achievement, combining scientific ingenuity, spiritual practice, and social cooperation to keep their empire strong. As you reflect on the complex systems that sustained the Aztec Empire, you can't help but marvel at their understanding of the environment. They were not conquerors of nature, they were partners with it. They didn't seek to control every element. Rather, they worked with what they had, using the cycles of nature to their advantage while maintaining a spiritual connection to the earth. And even in times of trouble, they adapted, knowing that they couldn't always predict the weather, the pests, or the whims of the gods, but they could control their response, learning, evolving, and adapting along the way. Now that you've walked through the bustling markets of Tenochtitlan and felt the pulse of the Aztec economy, it becomes clear that corn wasn't just an agricultural product, it was a key pillar of the entire empire's structure. Corn wasn't only cultivated for the Aztec people's daily sustenance, but it also played a massive role in trade, diplomacy, and religion. As you stand there, surrounded by the vibrant colours and sounds of the market, it's impossible to ignore how deeply woven corn was into the Aztec way of life. Its reach extended far beyond the fields and the kitchen. It was a symbol of the empire's strength and unity, and its presence in trade and commerce was an essential part of what made the Aztec economy thrive. The role of corn in Aztec trade was immense. It wasn't simply consumed within the city of Tenochtitlan, it was also exchanged between different regions, carried across trade routes that connected the heart of the empire with distant territories. Picture yourself walking through the crowded market, the earthy smell of roasted corn and the sound of merchants haggling filling the air. Everywhere you look, there are bundles of dried corn, tortillas stacked high, and traders selling fresh cobs. Corn wasn't just food, it was currency. Whether it was traded for luxury goods like textiles and jade or essential resources like obsidian for weapons and tools, corn was a vital part of the marketplace's economy. Corn wasn't the only item exchanged in the markets, but it was central to everything. In a society where agriculture formed the backbone of the economy, it made sense that the most essential crop would also serve as the primary medium for economic transactions. The Aztecs didn't have a form of paper money or coins as we do today. Instead, they used goods, especially corn, as a direct exchange medium. For example, merchants could pay for their goods with large quantities of corn, or individuals could settle debts by handing over a certain amount of dried maize. The value of corn was inextricably tied to its role as the staple food of the people, and its ability to sustain not only the population of Tenochtitlan but the entire empire. The marketplaces weren't just places for purchasing food, they were economic hubs that connected the entire empire. The Aztecs' extensive trade networks allowed for goods to flow throughout Mesoamerica. Traders from the surrounding areas would come to Tenochtitlan to exchange corn, beans, cacao, and other essential goods. The Aztecs controlled these trade routes, using their agricultural prowess as leverage. In return for corn and other products, the Aztec Empire would acquire precious resources like turquoise, feathers, and luxury items from distant regions, making the capital a thriving metropolis at the heart of the empire. What's even more fascinating is that corn was also integral to the political system. As part of the Aztec tribute system, the empire's subjects were required to pay regular tribute to the capital. This tribute was often paid in corn, an essential part of the empire's sustenance. The tribute system served as a way for the Aztec rulers to assert control over their subjects, ensuring that the empire's resources were funneled into the central power base. But it wasn't just a form of taxation, it was also a way to maintain peace and stability throughout the empire. The tribute system allowed the Aztecs to feed their large population, maintain their grand temples and palaces, and fund their military campaigns. Corn wasn't just a resource, it was a tool of governance, reinforcing the power of the Aztec rulers and their control over the vast territories they had conquered. Picture the intricate web of relationships at play. You're standing in the heart of Tenochtitlan, surrounded by the vibrant, thriving markets. People from all corners of the empire gather here to exchange goods, but it's corn that holds everything together. You can almost see how it moves through the empire, how it's grown in the fields, harvested, brought to market, and sent as tribute to the emperor. Each kernel of corn holds the weight of the entire empire's structure, its economy, its social order, and its power. Without corn, the Aztec Empire wouldn't have been able to function the way it did. It was the lifeblood of the civilization, circulating through the hands of farmers, traders, and rulers, binding the empire together. Yet, trade and tribute weren't the only roles corn played in Aztec society. The Aztecs were deeply religious people, and corn had a profound spiritual significance. It wasn't just food, it was a sacred gift from the gods. According to Aztec creation myths, the gods had created humanity from corn, and therefore corn was seen as a symbol of life itself. The gods were directly involved in the fertility of crops, and every harvest was a reminder of their divine power. Corn wasn't merely cultivated to survive, it was grown to honour the gods. As you walk through the fields, you begin to understand that the Aztec farmers weren't just planting corn to feed their people. They were part of a larger cosmic cycle, one that tied them to the divine. The importance of corn in Aztec religious practices is hard to overstate. Festivals dedicated to the gods of maize, like Centiol, were integral to the spiritual life of the Aztec people. During these festivals, the Aztecs would make offerings of corn, often in elaborate ceremonies, to ensure the gods' continued favour. These rituals were not just about asking for a bountiful harvest, they were a way to reinforce the connection between the divine and the earthly. The very act of planting and harvesting corn was an offering to the gods, and it was this connection to the divine that elevated the work of the farmers to something sacred. The Aztecs also believed that the corn was intimately tied to their identity as a people. Corn wasn't just a physical crop, it was part of their spiritual and cultural DNA. It was woven into their myths, their rituals, and their daily lives. Whether it was in the form of tortillas, tamales, or even a ceremonial drink made from corn called atole, corn was central to their diet. Every meal, every ritual, and every act of trade involved corn in some way, cementing its role as the heart of Aztec civilization. Historians still debate the exact ways that these religious and cultural beliefs shaped the Aztec approach to agriculture. Some scholars argue that the intense reverence for corn led the Aztecs to develop advanced agricultural techniques, such as the chinampa system, which allowed them to grow crops in the shallow waters of Lake Texcoco. Others suggest that the ritualistic aspects of corn cultivation were a way for the Aztecs to maintain social order, tying the people to the land and the gods in ways that reinforced the power structures of the empire. Regardless of the perspective, one thing is clear. Corn was not just a crop. It was the foundation of the Aztec worldview, a central element that sustained not only their bodies, but their society and their spirit. The symbolism of corn in Aztec society was deeply ingrained in their art, culture, and even their political structure. You can almost imagine the murals and carvings that depicted corn as a symbol of abundance and life, reminding the people of the divine forces at work in their lives. Corn was in the air, the earth, and the water. It was everywhere, binding the people to their gods and to one another. The complex relationship between trade, tribute, religion, and the economy highlights just how integral corn was to the Aztec way of life. Without it, the empire would not have been able to sustain its growing population, maintain its influence over other cultures, or even survive. Corn wasn't just a crop in the Aztec world. It was a symbol of life, a tool of governance, and a vital part of the cultural, economic, and spiritual fabric of the empire. Historians still debate how the fall of the Aztec Empire, brought on by Spanish conquest, impacted the agricultural systems that were so central to its existence. Some believe that the Spanish introduction of new crops and farming methods disrupted the delicate balance the Aztecs had maintained for centuries. Others argue that the collapse of the empire itself was more due to the social, political, and military upheaval brought on by the invasion, rather than any intrinsic failure of the agricultural system. Whatever the case, it's clear that corn, and the system surrounding its cultivation, was central to the success and the eventual fall of the Aztec Empire. It was more than just a food, it was the foundation upon which everything stood. As you continue your journey through the Aztec landscape, you begin to grasp just how intricately the agricultural and social systems were intertwined. Corn, though central to daily life, was not only vital for sustenance and trade, but also played a role in maintaining the very structure of Aztec society. The role of the agricultural worker, specifically the farmers or tlacololeros, was crucial not just for growing food, but for maintaining the social fabric of the empire. The tlacololeros worked tirelessly in the fields, often in teams or as part of larger communal efforts, ensuring that the land was productive and the empire was fed. This was no small task. These workers were at the heart of the Aztec agricultural system, and while they were often seen as common labourers, their role was deeply respected. Imagine walking through the fields alongside these labourers. The day is long, but the work is steady, rhythmic. The workers move with a shared sense of purpose, planting, harvesting, and tending to the crops with careful attention. The work is not just for survival, but for the prosperity of the entire empire. The tlacololeros were the unsung heroes, working from dawn until dusk to ensure that the land yielded the crops that the Aztec rulers and nobles relied on. While they were not the ones enjoying the fruits of their labour in grand palaces, they understood the critical importance of what they did. Without their tireless work, the entire system would collapse. The work of the tlacololeros went beyond just planting and harvesting corn. They were also responsible for maintaining the intricate irrigation systems that kept the crops watered and thriving. In a land where water could be both a blessing and a curse, these farmers had to ensure that the flow of water was controlled and directed precisely where it was needed. The canals and levees, built to direct water to the fields, were not just engineering feats, they were lifelines. Without these systems, the milpas or crop fields would be at the mercy of the seasons. The work of the tlacololeros in ensuring the maintenance of these systems was essential to the survival of the crops and, by extension, the survival of the entire Aztec society. Historians still debate the exact social status of the tlacololeros within Aztec society. Some believe that while they were viewed as common labourers, their work was still highly valued, and they were considered essential to the functioning of the empire. Others suggest that their role was seen as more menial, relegated to the lower classes in the social hierarchy. Regardless of their social standing, it's clear that the tlacololeros were indispensable to the empire's agricultural success. Without their hard work, the entire social structure would have collapsed. But the Tlacololeros were not working alone. Their efforts were supported by the broader community, which was deeply involved in agricultural practices. The Aztecs had a system of communal labour known as mitia, which required everyone, from the nobility to the commoners, to contribute to the collective welfare. This system of shared labour helped ensure that the fields were tended to and that the empire's resources were used efficiently. Each person had a role to play, whether it was planting, harvesting, or ensuring that the water was directed to the right places. As you walk through the milpas, you begin to understand how much work went into the land and how much the Aztecs depended on each other. It wasn't just the Tlacololeros who made the system work, it was the whole community, working together to ensure the empire's prosperity. The work wasn't always easy, but it was done with pride. The Aztecs knew that their survival depended on the strength of their agricultural system, and they treated their land with great care and respect. Historians still argue over how sustainable the Aztec agricultural system was in the long term. Some believe that their intense focus on intensive farming, like the chinampa system and crop rotation, made the empire's agriculture highly resilient. Others suggest that the increasing demands of the empire eventually led to a strain on the land and its resources. What's clear, however, is that the Aztecs had a deep respect for their land and their crops. They didn't see farming as a menial task. It was a sacred responsibility, one that had to be carried out with care and dedication. The connection between the farmers and the land was not just physical, it was spiritual. The Aztecs believed that the gods had created the world through sacrifice, and they saw their work in the fields as part of this ongoing cosmic cycle. The work of the Tlacololeros was not only about feeding the people, it was a way of honouring the gods. Every seed planted, every crop harvested was part of a larger cosmic order. By working the land, the farmers were participating in this sacred process, ensuring that the earth remained fertile and that the gods' favour was maintained. Historians still debate the exact role of religion in Aztec agriculture. Some argue that the religious rituals associated with farming were essential to the success of the crops, while others suggest that these rituals were more about reinforcing the social and cultural order. Regardless of the specific details, it's clear that for the Aztecs, agriculture was deeply intertwined with religion. The work of the Tlacololeros wasn't just about feeding the people, it was about maintaining balance in the world, ensuring that the gods' favour was won and that the crops continued to thrive. Standing in the midst of the milpas, the sun sinking low on the horizon, you begin to feel the weight of the Aztecs' labour. You can almost hear the rhythmic sound of the workers, their movements synchronized with the natural rhythms of the earth. Every task, from planting to irrigation, was done with a sense of duty, a recognition that the work was vital not just for survival, but for the continuation of the empire itself. The Tlacololeros worked not only for their own survival, but for the survival of the empire and the people who relied on their labour. Their dedication to the land and to their role in the larger system was a testament to the strength of Aztec society. Historians still debate the role of the Aztec agricultural system in the downfall of the empire. Some argue that the empire's reliance on such a complex, labour-intensive system eventually led to its undoing. Others believe that the Aztecs' agricultural practices were too efficient to fail. What's certain, however, is that the Aztecs' deep understanding of the land and their reverence for their crops played a crucial role in the empire's ability to thrive for as long as it did. The Tlacololeros were at the heart of this system, their work ensuring that the empire's agricultural foundation remained strong, even in the face of challenges. As you stand there, watching the sunset over the milpas, you realise that the Aztec agricultural system wasn't just about the crops. It was about community, about working together to ensure the survival of the empire. The Tlacololeros, the farmers, the traders, the rulers, all were part of this vast interconnected system that allowed the Aztecs to create one of the most powerful empires in Mesoamerica. And at the centre of it all, providing life and sustenance, was corn. As you continue your exploration through the Aztec world, there's a quiet realization that the bond between the people, the land and the gods was not just abstract. It was deeply embedded in every action, every festival, and every cycle of planting and harvest. It becomes clear that the fall of the Aztec Empire wasn't solely a result of military conquest. The arrival of the Spanish and their foreign diseases played a huge role, but the agricultural practices of the Aztecs, so finely tuned to the land and the gods, also shaped their civilization's eventual downfall. The intricate systems that had allowed the Aztec Empire to thrive were severely disrupted, not just by war, but by the disruption of this deep relationship between the people and their land. Imagine the scene. It's a few months after the Spanish have arrived. The once thriving fields of Tenochtitlan, filled with vibrant corn and other crops, begin to show signs of distress. The European settlers bring with them diseases that the Aztecs have never encountered: smallpox, measles, and influenza. As the disease spreads through the population, entire villages and agricultural communities begin to suffer. The workers, the tlacololeros, the farmers who once tended to the land with such care, fall ill. The once productive milpas, nurtured by generations of agricultural knowledge, begin to wither without enough hands to tend them. It's not just the physical toll of disease that disrupts the agricultural system. The social and religious structures that once underpinned the agricultural practices also begin to crumble. The spiritual connection to the land, the deep respect for the gods who provided the rain and fertility for the crops, starts to fade as the Spanish impose their own belief systems. Corn, once sacred, begins to lose its cultural and spiritual significance as the new rulers shift the cultural fabric of the Aztec world. The disruption is not just one of governance, but of belief, a rupture between the people and their land. Historians still debate the extent to which the disruption of agricultural traditions contributed to the downfall of the Aztecs. Some scholars argue that it was a slow erosion, where the death toll from disease, combined with the cultural and social changes forced by the Spanish, led to a gradual collapse of the agricultural system. Others suggest that the interruption of the agricultural cycle was more direct, with the disintegration of traditional farming practices leading to food shortages and instability. Either way, what's clear is that the Aztec agricultural system, which had been such a cornerstone of their civilization, was fundamentally altered in the wake of European contact. As you walk through the now deserted fields, the sound of the wind rustling through the once thriving crops, you begin to understand the weight of the change. The canals, the chinampas, the milpas, they were all integral parts of a system that had sustained an empire for centuries. And yet, in the span of just a few decades, that system began to break down. Disease, warfare, and the imposition of foreign systems on the land led to a shift in how the people interacted with the soil, the crops, and the land that had once sustained them. The great agricultural system that had allowed Tenochtitlan to flourish began to falter, and with it, the empire began to weaken. But it wasn't just the people of the Aztec Empire who felt the loss. The land itself seemed to mourn the absence of its caretakers. As the fields fell into disrepair and the systems of irrigation and planting that had been so carefully constructed started to decay, the once vibrant landscape became quiet. The bustling markets, where corn was traded as both food and currency, became empty. The divine cycle of the seasons, so carefully synchronized with the agricultural practices, began to lose its rhythm as the land fell into neglect. The disruption wasn't just cultural, it was environmental, as the once thriving farming communities were replaced by European agricultural practices that didn't understand or respect the delicate balance the Aztecs had maintained with their land. Historians still debate how much the disruption of agricultural practices influenced the broader collapse of the Aztec Empire. Some believe that the collapse was due to a combination of disease, military conflict, and the loss of religious cohesion, while others suggest that the breakdown of the agricultural system was one of the key factors in weakening the empire's foundation. Regardless of the specifics, it's clear that the Aztecs' deep relationship with their land and their sacred responsibility to care for it was a central part of what allowed their society to thrive. And when that connection was severed, through the arrival of foreign diseases, military conquest, and cultural erasure, the very foundations of their civilization began to crumble. As you stand in the quiet remains of the fields, you can almost hear the echoes of the past, the laughter of the farmers, the rhythm of the planting and harvesting, the songs sung to the gods, the sound of the markets bustling with activity. It's a reminder of how deeply connected the Aztecs were to their environment, and how, even in the face of invasion, the loss of this connection was one of the most profound shifts that led to their downfall. The agricultural practices that had allowed them to create a thriving empire were no longer viable, and the empire itself could not survive without them. In this way, the fall of the Aztec Empire wasn't just the result of military conquest. It was a slow, inevitable collapse, one that began with the destruction of the very systems that allowed the Aztecs to feed their people. Corn, which had once been a symbol of life, became a symbol of loss, a reminder of the deep connection between the land, the people, and the gods that had once sustained the mighty empire. Historians continue to reflect on the legacy of the Aztec agricultural system. Some argue that the agricultural practices like the chinampas were ahead of their time and could have been adapted to modern farming techniques. Others believe that the fall of the Aztec Empire marked the end of a unique way of life, one that was forever altered by the arrival of European colonizers. But what remains clear, even in the aftermath of the empire's fall, is the profound impact that the Aztecs' agricultural system had on their civilization. The land, the crops, and the rituals surrounding them were central to the success of the Aztec Empire, and the loss of this sacred relationship was a critical factor in the empire's ultimate collapse. As you walk away from the fields, the sun setting on the horizon, you carry with you the knowledge that the Aztec Empire, though lost, still holds lessons for the present. The way they nurtured their crops, respected the land, and intertwined their agriculture with their spiritual beliefs offers valuable insight into the ways in which modern societies can learn from the past. The Aztec Empire may have fallen, but its legacy lives on, in the crops they grew, the systems they created, and the relationship they had with the earth that sustained them. As you walk further through the now quiet ruins, there's a lingering sense of both loss and reverence. The earth, which once teemed with life, seems to hold the memories of a civilization that existed in perfect harmony with nature. The Aztecs were not just farmers, they were stewards of the land, and in their agricultural practices they found a profound connection to the divine. Walking through the remnants of their fields, it becomes clear that their agricultural system wasn't just a means to an end. It was part of a larger worldview, a philosophy that saw human life as an integral part of a greater cosmic cycle. The Aztecs understood that the survival of their empire was intricately linked to the health of the land. It wasn't just about growing enough corn to feed their population. It was about ensuring that the land could continue to provide for future generations. They practiced sustainable farming methods that took into account the land's needs and limitations. The chinampa system, for example, allowed them to cultivate crops in a way that maintained the health of the soil. The floating gardens were not only efficient, they were a sustainable way of farming that worked in harmony with the natural environment. Imagine the way the chinampas looked, stretching out across the shallow waters of Lake Texcoco, creating a stunning visual harmony between nature and human ingenuity. These floating islands were the result of generations of trial and error, of learning how to work with the land rather than trying to control it. The Aztecs understood that their survival depended on a delicate balance between human effort and the natural world, and so they worked tirelessly to ensure that the land remained fertile, that the water was properly managed, and that the cycles of nature could continue uninterrupted. The relationship between the Aztecs and their land was in many ways a reflection of their relationship with the gods. Just as the gods had created the world through sacrifice, so too did the Aztecs view their agricultural work as a form of sacrifice, a way of giving back to the earth. In this way, farming wasn't just about survival. It was about participating in a sacred act of creation and renewal. Every seed planted, every crop harvested was an offering to the gods, and in return, the gods provided the blessings of fertility, growth, and abundance. In a way, the fall of the Aztec Empire can be seen as the collapse of this sacred relationship. The arrival of the Spanish disrupted not just the political and military structures of the empire, but also the spiritual connection between the people and the land. The introduction of European crops and farming techniques which were foreign to the Aztec way of life further strained the land's ability to provide for the population. The loss of this connection to the land was not just physical, it was spiritual. The Aztecs had always viewed the earth as a living entity, and to sever that bond was to sever their very sense of identity. Historians still argue over the long-term effects of European colonization on Aztec agriculture. Some suggest that the introduction of new crops and farming techniques helped sustain the population in the aftermath of the empire's collapse. Others believe that the changes to the land were so profound that the Aztec agricultural system could never have fully recovered. What's clear, however, is that the disruption of this sacred relationship between the Aztecs and their land had far-reaching consequences, not just for the empire, but for the people who relied on it for their survival. As you continue walking through the ruins, you begin to understand that the loss of the Aztec Empire was not just the fall of a political system, but the collapse of an entire way of life. The Aztecs had created a society that was intricately tied to the land, and when that connection was broken, the very foundation of the empire began to crumble. The chinampas, the milpas, the fields that had once fed the people now lie abandoned, overgrown with weeds, a stark reminder of what was lost. But even in the face of this loss, the Aztec agricultural system still holds lessons for the present. The way they worked with the land, rather than trying to dominate it, offers valuable insight into sustainable farming practices that modern societies can learn from. The chinampa system, in particular, provides a model for how to cultivate crops in a way that doesn't degrade the environment, but instead works in harmony with it. The Aztecs understood that agriculture was not just about growing food, it was about maintaining a balance with nature, ensuring that the land could continue to provide for future generations. As you stand there reflecting on the ruins of the fields, it's clear that the Aztecs' agricultural legacy lives on. Their understanding of sustainable farming, their reverence for the land, and their ability to work in harmony with the earth are lessons that we can apply to our own agricultural practices today. In a world that often seems disconnected from the natural environment, the Aztecs offer a reminder of the importance of living in balance with the land. Their agricultural practices were not just a means to an end, they were a way of life, a philosophy that saw the land as a living entity to be respected and nurtured. Historians still reflect on the Aztec Empire, and while much of their civilization has been lost, their agricultural practices continue to resonate. The lessons they left behind about sustainability, balance, and respect for the earth are more relevant today than ever. In a time when our global food systems are under threat, the Aztecs offer a model for how we can work with the land to create a more sustainable and equitable future. As you walk away from the fields, the sun setting behind the distant mountains, you can't help but feel a sense of connection to the past. The Aztecs may be gone, but their legacy lives on in the land they cultivated, the crops they grew, and the lessons they taught about the importance of living in harmony with nature. And perhaps, in some small way, we can honour that legacy by returning to the principles of sustainable farming that they so carefully nurtured. As the sun dips below the horizon, the landscape begins to fade into a deep, peaceful dusk. Yet, within this quiet, there's an undercurrent of reverence for what the Aztecs achieved. Their connection to their land was an essential part of what made them an empire of such remarkable depth and resilience. As you stand there, surrounded by the remnants of what was once an agricultural paradise, you begin to understand that the downfall of the Aztec Empire wasn't simply a political or military loss. It was the collapse of a way of life that had been built on a foundation of agricultural wisdom, spiritual reverence, and a deep respect for the natural world. Their agricultural practices, particularly their approach to cultivating corn, served as the lifeblood of the empire. And when that foundation was eroded, by disease, by colonization, and by the breakdown of their spiritual and cultural practices, the empire couldn't survive. The Aztecs' understanding of the land was far beyond what most other civilizations of their time knew. Their farming methods, including the chinampas, were advanced in ways that we are only beginning to fully appreciate today. The floating gardens of Tenochtitlan were not just clever adaptations to a watery landscape, they were emblematic of a culture that understood the importance of working in tandem with nature. The Aztecs didn't see themselves as separate from the natural world, but as part of an intricate web where every action, every choice had a ripple effect. The land wasn't simply there to be conquered and harvested, it was revered and cared for. This deep spiritual relationship with the earth set the Aztecs apart from many other cultures, and it was integral to their prosperity. In reflecting on the history of the Aztec agricultural system, it's impossible not to recognize how central corn was to their daily life, economy, and religion. Corn wasn't just a food, it was the heart of Aztec civilization. It was considered a gift from the gods, essential for not only physical survival, but spiritual sustenance. Every ear of corn, every plant was connected to a divine cycle that stretched from the cosmos down to the earth. The Aztecs believed that the gods themselves had sacrificed to create life on earth, and in turn, the Aztecs offered corn back to the gods as part of their agricultural rituals. Corn was embedded in every aspect of their culture, from the rituals in the fields to the food on the table, from the marketplaces to the sacred ceremonies. Corn was more than just a crop, it was a cornerstone of Aztec religion. Rituals performed during planting and harvesting weren't just about ensuring a successful crop, they were about maintaining harmony with the gods. During harvest festivals, priests, farmers, and the community would gather to offer thanks for the bounty of corn. But it wasn't just about gratitude. It was about securing the future. By honouring the gods through ceremonies, the Aztecs believed they ensured the cycles of the earth would continue. The rhythm of planting and harvesting was a direct reflection of their spiritual connection to the cosmos. The work of the tlacololeros was thus seen as an act of devotion, not merely physical labour, but sacred work that maintained the balance between human beings, nature, and the divine. In thinking about this, you begin to appreciate just how complex the relationship between the Aztecs and their land truly was. It wasn't just about planting seeds and reaping the rewards, it was about participating in an ongoing cycle that connected them to the divine. The Aztecs didn't see agriculture as something to be mastered. They viewed it as something to be nurtured, respected, and worked alongside. It wasn't about dominating nature, it was about working with it to ensure balance. This is a critical understanding that has profound implications for how we approach our own agricultural systems today. The Aztecs, with their advanced farming techniques and spiritual practices, offer a model for living in harmony with the environment. It's a model that we could learn much from, especially as we face the challenges of climate change, resource depletion, and unsustainable farming practices in our own time. The chinampa system, for example, serves as a remarkable testament to the Aztecs' ingenuity. These floating gardens weren't just a solution to the challenges posed by their environment, they were an embodiment of sustainable agriculture. Chinampas allowed the Aztecs to make use of land that would otherwise be submerged, creating fertile fields in the middle of a lake. The system wasn't just productive, it was resilient. The Aztecs understood the cyclical nature of farming, the need to balance cultivation with conservation, and the importance of maintaining the health of the land for future generations. The way they constructed the chinampas, using organic materials and relying on the water to nourish the crops, was a brilliant example of how human ingenuity can work with, rather than against, nature. As you stand there, looking out over the remnants of the chinampas, you can almost hear the bustle of activity that once thrived there. The sounds of farmers working, the gentle hum of water moving through canals, and the laughter of people coming together in community. But those sounds have faded into history, leaving behind only the quiet whisper of a once thriving agricultural paradise. The fall of the Aztec Empire was not just a loss of political power, it was the loss of a deeply connected way of life. The Aztecs' relationship with their land, and with the corn that sustained them, was central to who they were as a people. And when that connection was severed, it marked the beginning of the end for the empire. Historians still wrestle with the question of whether the Aztec Empire's downfall could have been avoided. Could they have adapted their agricultural practices to meet the challenges posed by European colonization? Could they have sustained their way of life in the face of such a profound disruption? Some argue that the empire was already in decline before the Spanish arrived, with internal struggles and external pressures weighing heavily on its systems. Others suggest that the Spanish invasion, with its diseases, warfare, and cultural upheaval, dealt the final blow to a civilization that had been built on an incredibly sophisticated and interconnected system of agriculture, spirituality, and governance. What remains undeniable, however, is that the legacy of the Aztec agricultural system still holds value today. Their practices were based on sustainability, balance, and respect for the land, values that are more important now than ever. In a world facing environmental degradation, food insecurity, and the erosion of natural resources, the lessons of the Aztecs offer valuable insights into how we can restore balance to our own agricultural systems. The Aztecs' deep understanding of their environment, their reliance on sustainable farming practices, and their reverence for the divine cycles of nature provide a roadmap for building a more sustainable future. As you stand amidst the ruins of the fields, you realize that the Aztecs' relationship with their land was more than just a means of survival, it was a way of living. They were in tune with the earth, working alongside it to create a thriving civilization that was both advanced and deeply connected to the natural world. In today's world, where modern agriculture often exploits the land rather than nurtures it, the Aztec model offers a powerful reminder of what's possible when we learn to live in harmony with. As the night settles in and the last rays of sunlight slip behind the distant mountains, you're left in quiet reflection, surrounded by the ruins of the once thriving Aztec Empire. The peaceful silence is almost unnerving, as if the land itself is still mourning the loss of a civilization so deeply connected to its roots. The Aztecs' relationship with the earth was not just an agricultural practice, but a philosophy, a worldview that saw humans as caretakers of the land rather than conquerors. It's in this deep connection that the Aztecs were able to flourish for so long, creating a civilization that thrived through harmony, balance, and respect for nature. The fall of this way of life, so abruptly interrupted by the arrival of the Spanish, leaves behind lessons not only about the fragility of civilizations, but also about the importance of sustainable living in the face of external and internal challenges. As you stand there, contemplating the expansive agricultural systems that once fed millions, you realize that the fall of the Aztec Empire is also a story about human resilience and adaptation. While their farming methods were innovative and sustainable, the disruption brought about by the Spanish conquest and the diseases they introduced left the Aztecs grappling with an unprecedented shift. The sacred relationship between the people and the land, which had been nurtured over generations, was severed, and with it the foundation of Aztec society began to crack. The military conquest, the loss of life to disease, and the imposition of foreign systems all played their parts in the collapse, but so too did the disruption of the deeply embedded spiritual and cultural connection to the land. The Aztec people's entire identity, their way of life, was built upon the idea that the land was sacred, an entity that gave them life and required reciprocal care. When this bond was shattered, the very foundation of their civilization began to crumble. Historians have long debated the reasons for the rapid collapse of the Aztec Empire. Some attribute it to the tactical superiority of the Spanish soldiers or the spread of disease, while others point to the internal strife that existed within the empire. While these factors undeniably played a role, the disruption of the agricultural system was perhaps one of the most significant, yet least acknowledged contributors. The Aztecs' agricultural expertise had been the cornerstone of their success. It sustained their population, supported their economy, and connected their society to the divine. To lose this, even in the face of military defeat, was to lose the heart of the empire. The arrival of the Spanish did not just destroy the physical structures of the Aztec Empire, it undermined the spiritual and cultural systems that had held it together. The missionaries who followed the conquistadors sought to erase the indigenous religious beliefs, including the reverence for the land that had been a part of Aztec spirituality. The sacred rituals that once ensured the fertility of the land, the offerings of corn to the gods, were replaced by foreign religious practices that disconnected the Aztecs from the spiritual foundation of their agriculture. The rituals of planting, harvesting, and giving thanks to the gods were no longer a central part of life, and with that shift, something essential was lost. The Aztecs were no longer participating in the divine cycle of life. They were being forced into a foreign cycle of obedience to conquerors. Yet, as you stand there in the quiet of the evening, you are left with a sense of hope. The legacy of the Aztec agricultural system, though buried in the past, is not lost. What they achieved, in terms of sustainable farming practices, remains an enduring lesson for us today. The chinampas, the careful crop rotations, the understanding of water management, all of these practices were based on a profound respect for the land. They didn't just use the land, they worked with it. They understood that the health of the land and the health of their people were inseparable, a lesson that resonates strongly in today's world. In many ways, the Aztecs' approach to farming is more relevant now than ever. With the growing environmental crises we face today, climate change, soil degradation, water shortages, there is a pressing need to return to practices that prioritize sustainability and balance. The Aztecs demonstrated that it's possible to build thriving civilizations without exploiting the land. The chinampa system, for example, is a perfect illustration of how humans can coexist with nature, using the natural environment to their advantage without draining it of its resources. Their ability to live in harmony with the earth, while simultaneously creating one of the most powerful empires of their time, is a model for how we can address the challenges of the present day. But this connection to the land wasn't just a matter of practicality, it was a matter of a worldview. The Aztecs saw their agricultural work as a spiritual duty, as an offering to the gods. In the modern world, we often view agriculture solely as a means to an end, a commodity to be bought and sold. The Aztecs, however, viewed it as part of a larger cosmic order, a way of maintaining balance in the universe. In many ways, this perspective is what allowed their agricultural systems to be so sustainable. They didn't see farming as just a means of survival. They saw it as a way of honouring the earth and the divine forces that sustained it. And perhaps this is the greatest lesson the Aztecs can offer us today, that true sustainability comes from understanding our relationship with the earth as a sacred partnership, not just a transactional one. In today's world, where environmental degradation and unsustainable farming practices threaten the planet, the wisdom of the Aztecs is not just relevant, it is urgent. Their agricultural methods, their respect for the land, and their understanding of the cycles of nature offer a path forward in a time of great ecological crisis. If we can learn to respect the earth as the Aztecs did, to work with nature rather than against it, perhaps we can avoid the same fate that befell this great civilization. As the stars begin to twinkle above, you're left with the quiet realization that the fall of the Aztec Empire, though tragic, is not the end of their story. Their legacy lives on in the land they worked, in the crops they grew, and in the lessons they left behind. The Aztec people may have been lost to history, but the wisdom they imparted remains. It is up to us in this moment to honour that legacy by working in harmony with the land and ensuring that the cycle of life continues for future generations. Now, as the soft night air cools and the sounds of nature fill the silence, it's time to reflect on the journey, on how far we've come and how far we still have to go. Like the Aztecs before us, we too must recognise our responsibility to the earth. The lessons of the past are not lost. They are waiting for us to learn them, and in doing so ensure a better future for the generations that will follow. The earth. 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 The earth.